Lawyers of Reddit, what was your hold it, your moment where you knew you would win? Not a lawyer, but got robbed at gunpoint in my home. Long story short, he would have gone to prison anyway, but the kicker is that the shoes he wore to court were the same shoes he stole from my house. Judge asked if I wanted them back. I said yes. Judge made him take them off in court and walk back in socks. Donated the shoes. It was more about the principle. I had a client charged with battery. The alleged victim didn't really support the prosecution's case, and in any event, was reluctant to testify. They still had another witness though, and she said that my client was hitting the alleged victim, so it wasn't looking great. The prosecutor and I were talking before court started, hanging out by the courtroom doors, when the witness walked in. She looked right at my client, who was sitting not 5 feet from me, then scanned the room, and said, "Where is client name?" You're the prosecutor, and I looked at each other for a minute, and then he said he needed to check on something. When I saw him a few minutes later, he told me he was dismissing the case. When the petitioner's attorney called me my brother's name, when I was on the stand. My brother is a shitbag, and I don't associate with him anymore, but dude has a lengthy criminal history and it pops up on traffic stops occasionally. So I was in court over custody of my oldest, and her mom's attorney was trying to paint me as a hypocrite for being an addict. I denied it all on the stand, and he said, "Now James the First must remind you that you are under oath, and by denying this you are committing perjury." I stared him dead in the face and said, "My name is Bill, James is my brother." Even the judge laughed at him, and the only reason we didn't bring it up sooner, we knew he submitted it as evidence, but had no idea why, was because I really wanted to know what he was up to with it all. We had some huge issues with the landlord, trying to enter without letting us know beforehand, not answering to fix issues, very aggressive when talking with us, when he decided to sell the place. He didn't check with us about the visits and just showed up randomly with potential buyers. We told him to get lost. He eventually left, but called us the same evening to threaten us. We sent emails to remind him of our rights as tenants, and he answered by threatening us some more in an email. We eventually end up in small issues court, not from the US, don't know the name, and he fabricates a story about how we are terrible tenants and we try to discourage buyers. We just showed the judge the emails as well as the open complaint to the police we filled a few days earlier. The judge couldn't believe it and gave him a formal warning, gave us 3 free months of rent. In the end, the guy just used a real estate company to sell the place. All went smoothly, and we still live there with lovely landlords that aren't completely bonkers. My client was riding his motorcycle on a relatively calm street when this guy exited his garage without looking and ran over him. In deposition, the guy brought a witness that was with him on the passenger seat. The whole time, the witness maintained that my client was driving too fast and that there was no time to brake the car. I asked him the same question a few times in different ways, making him tell the story again. In the 4th telling, he, already a bit frustrated, let it slip. Look, who've already told you. We were exiting the garage, and, as soon as I lifted up from getting my cell phone on the car's carpet you are your weight. So you didn't even see the crash, There was no coming back from that. Parent termination case I was prosecuting. Dad went on how he has changed his life around and worked the AA program. Asked him what step he was on, and he proudly proclaimed 3. Asked him what step 3 is, he had no idea, then asked him step 2 was. Again, no idea. Parental rights terminated. When I practiced insurance defense, was handed a file to take over if a slip and fall. Guy tripped on a hose, tore his ACL. The partner had taken the guy's depot already, so I read the transcript. I'm a Michigan football fan, watched every game for 20 years. This guy testified he was the starting safety for a certain rival for certain years. Also that he graduated with a double major that doesn't exist at that school. I immediately knew this was false. Partner didn't understand. Dug deeper, lied about so much stuff unrelated to the fall for no reason. Eventually found high school records from football injuries of head trauma, knee injuries, and a slip and fall injury a few months after ours. He also testified he rehabbed an ACL surgery after 1 month. Motion for fraud on the court filed, immediately settled. It was my 3rd month of practice. I was in family law at the time, representing mom in a petition for a restraining order against boyfriend/dad. At issue in the broader case was child visitation, custody, support etc., but today's hearing was just on the row. We had pretty good facts, but it was mostly based on testimony of the parties. My client was way more reputable as a witness, so I was feeling confident. 10 minutes before the hearing, my client shows up. I give her a last minute prep on what to expect, and then she says I'm glad I'm going through with this. I can't deal with it anymore, and he's just getting worse. To top it off, he left me a drunken, ranting voicemail on Saturday. You have your phone with you? Yes. We play the voicemail, and it's a full 2 minutes of ex-boyfriend screaming shit, like I should have fucking killed you, when we were together. You were always such a bitch. I hope you burn to death in a fire. I didn't have time to ask her why the fuck she hadn't said anything to me about the voicemail before the bailiff called our case. We sit, the judge asks if either side has additional evidence, and I ask for permission to play the voicemail. Ex-boyfriend, who didn't have an attorney, didn't object, so I played the whole nasty 2-minute rant in open court. Judge goes, we're going to take a brief recess before I issue my ruling. If the parties want to meet and confer in the hall, they are welcome to. Boyfriend knew he was fucked. We settled the whole damn case then and there. My client got a wish list in terms of custody, supervised visitation, child support, plus the restraining order, to boot. Sued a former employer for $3,500 in unpaid wages. It was a slam dunk. Had a letter stating what my salary would be versus pay stubs that were less, so I didn't bother getting a lawyer to save on fees. Turns out the company thought they could try the same strategy. I show up to court, and the manager of the local office is there with an affidavit from the CEO saying he's allowed to represent the company in court. The judge asks him, are you an attorney? No, just an employee. A company can't have pro se representation. Judge immediately ruled in my favor. Felt fucking fantastic. Not a lawyer, but I'm currently in a custody battle. Mother is saying I can't be trusted because I've been refusing to take our child to the therapist. The therapist testified I couldn't bring our child in because therapy must have both parents' consent, and mother has retracted consent. Very abbreviated, I was prosecuting a convenience store owner for luring a young girl who regularly came into the store back to a part of the store to grope/fondle and kiss her, child enticement. It was the only section of the store without surveillance camera coverage. They were in the back room for about 2 minutes and 17 seconds, per the timestamp on the videos. Of the many arguments the defense put on, one was there was no way there was enough time for anything to happen. In my rebuttal on closing, I asked the jury to imagine what could happen in the room in that amount of time, and I asked them to all close their eyes while I timed out 2 minutes and 17 seconds on my watch, in silence. After about 60 seconds, 2 of the jurors started crying. Knew it was going to be guilty right then. I represented an elderly Indian couple who didn't speak English very well and owned a rental property. They had a tenant at the time who had not paid rent in over 6 months. They had tried to evict her on their own, but when they got to court, the tenant produced some handwritten notes which they had given her the year prior thanking her for payment, but they failed to date the notes. Of course, the tenant added recent dates herself. The tenant also produced a partial certified check receipt, but most of it was illegible. Anyway, because of their poor English, they had difficulty understand the questions and giving intelligent answers, so they lost the initial case. They hired me to help address all of the various lies that the tenant was putting forth. Anyway, we refiled. I had my clients pull the banking records so we could show the date that the certified check was actually deposited into their account. The plan was simple. Let the tenant make the same arguments and then present the banking statements showing the deposit date. My clients also found a photocopy of one of their notes, but it was undated, unlike the copy the tenant presented the last time. Well, when the judge finally understood that the things the tenant had presented occurred the year before, his cheeks turned bright red, and he asked the tenant, "What year did you make this payment?" The tenant started saying something, like she couldn't be exactly sure when. And the judge cut her off again in a very loud voice, "What year?" Needless to say, the clients got their eviction granted. Bonus content: when the tenant arrived at court, I watched as she got out of her car, walked to the back, and pulled out a wheelchair, and proceeded to stay in that wheelchair until the case was over. Once the judge left the courtroom, she folded up the wheelchair and carried it to her car, mumbling that she hates ing lawyers. Anyway, that was a very satisfying day.